Okay, so today we are going to be looking at cognition. Basically, just looking at how we think and process information. So we're going to start with this very simple question: what is a thought, or what is that process? What does that look like when you're actually thinking about things and trying to process information? Um, so when we are looking at this, we are looking at two basic types of thought. We have images, what you just see here, pictures of dogs. These are, what pops up into our mind when we start to think are images. Okay, so you have images, and the other thing that we have are what are known as concepts. Okay, these can also be called schemas, concepts. Yoink. This is a great tool, a great writing tool. Okay, so you have images and concepts. Images, real simple, real cut and dry. These are pictures in your mind. Whenever you're thinking about things, you often have these images pop up in your brain as you're trying to think about them. Now, on the other hand, we have things that are known as concepts. Okay, so concepts are groupings of different um, things. Um, in life, there are lots of different items in the world, millions upon billions of random items. So, what our brain does is instead of trying to put uh, to name each individual item, it often groups those items together. And those groupings are what we would call a concept. So you can see here we have pictures of what? What are all these? These are all dogs. Very good. Okay. So that a dog is a concept. This here we have a German Shepherd, but we wouldn't always call it that. We would just call it a dog. This is obviously a Great Dane. We would call it a dog. This is, I don't know, some puppy, and so is this. I think it's a Shih Tzu. Who knows? Okay. But we call all of these things just a dog. Otherwise, it would be kind of a lengthy conversation to be like, oh, that German Shepherd mixed with blah, 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 blah. We just call it a dog. Think about cars. Thousands of different types of cars. Mazdas, Nissans, the very specific types of cars, the make, the model, whatever. We just call it a car, or we just call it a truck, a chair, a cup. Lots of different types of chairs, lots of different types of cups. We just call it those things, and we think about it in that way because it is easier for our brain to process. Now, within this concept of, within this term, concept, we have what is known as a prototype. Okay? A prototype. Now, a prototype is our best I can spell. Yoink. Prototype. Very good. Excellent. This is super easy for you to read. Okay, so we have what is known as a prototype. So prototype is our best example of a concept. So when asked what kind of dog is Mr. Monk's prototype, his prototype is Teddy. That's the first thing that is the best image or the best type of dog that comes to his mind. It is the best example of a thing. Okay, so when you think of a chair, maybe for you as a student, you might not even think of a chair, you might think of a desk because it is the thing that you sit in the most, or maybe you have a very comfortable chair, maybe you have a favorite coffee mug at home. So when I say cup, that is the thing that comes to your mind. For those of you who drive when I say car, you very well will think of your car that you drive. Okay, so those are some of the different ways in which when we are thinking, that's how we process information. So we will move on to the second part of this, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of the period or rest of this video talking about, is problem solving. Much of your life is spent trying to solve problems in one way or another. What are you going to wear in the morning? What are you going to do with your day? What are you going to say to this person? What are you going to eat? You are constantly trying to solve problems every single day. You have hundreds of problems that you have to solve. So we've got two major ways in which we solve those problems. The first is what is known as an algorithm. Okay, an algorithm. So an algorithm, as it says, a rule that guarantees the right solution to a problem. So when you are attempting to solve a problem, if you use an algorithm, you are going to follow a set of rules that if you follow those sets of rules properly, you are going to get the correct response. So think of it this way. What are some examples of this? Easy examples: math problems, um, you know, chemical combinations to get a specific solution. Um, Baking would be another example of an algorithm. If you follow this thing step by step, you are going to get the correct response. If you follow the instructions step by step, do the exact, baking time, heat. You put in the exact ingredients, you are going to get that thing. Okay, that's an algorithm. Now, algorithms are great. You're always getting the correct answer, which is fantastic. However, where do algorithms fall apart? Algorithms often fall apart when dealing with people. And so, there's no algorithm, there's no, step-by-step process for getting a date or consoling a friend who's lost a loved one. So instead of using algorithms, we use another method to solve problems. And that method is known as heuristics. And heuristics, as it says, is a rule of thumb. It is going with your gut. It is an educated guess. It is you having, oftentimes some prior knowledge of how to solve something and you going with that. It's fast. It's likely to cause you to have some errors, but we can't go through an algorithm every single day when we're trying to solve problems. Sometimes we just need something quick and fast. So this is what a heuristic is, and most of the time we are going to use heuristics in order to solve our problems. We're going to have an idea of what is going to work, and we're going to try it out. Not always going to happen, not always going to work out, but oftentimes this is the way in which we solve problems. So we have two different types of heuristics that we need to cover. So representative heuristics, as it says, it's judging a situation based on how similar the aspects are to the prototypes the person holds in their mind. Okay, so take a step back with what we talked about on the first slide. You are looking at your prototypes. The best example of a specific concept, of a grouping of people, okay, or a grouping of a subject. Your prototype for your dogs, prototype for a chair, stuff like that. So I'm going to read you a little story, and then I'll kind of go back and explain what's going on. So a stranger comes up to you and tells you about a person who is short, old, and likes to read poetry, and then asks you to guess whether this person is more likely to be a professor of classics at an Ivy League university or a truck driver. Which would be the better guess? Now, for the majority of you, your first thought is what? Very likely, you guys are thinking that the Ivy League professor would be a better guess. A person who likes poetry is much more likely to be someone who is, smart, old, and, does poetry stuff. Okay? Now, the correct answer for those of you who have taken a little bit more time to think about it and to smell a trap, is the truck driver. The truck driver would be the correct answer. Now, why is that? Well, let's start with this. How many Ivy League schools are there? And of those Ivy League schools, how many have a professor of classics? Um, and at most in the world there are 20 to 30 professors of classics that teach in Ivy League. And how many truck drivers are there? A whole lot more. So the likelihood is more that you would run into a truck driver who would like poetry, who is short and also bald. Now, why is it that we chose the Ivy League professor? Well, the reason why deals with representative heuristics. What are the stereotypes, or what do you think of a Ivy League professor? If you would just give me adjectives about an Ivy League professor, what would it be? Old, smart, you know, you have a list of adjectives that you could use to describe. And very likely most of those would be positive. Now, flip over to a truck driver and ask to give adjectives about truck drivers. And generally speaking, our adjectives that we'd use for the truck drivers are very likely less kind or less, nice than the Ivy League professor. So stereotypes are a great example of representative heuristics, as oftentimes this is the best idea that comes to our mind. The thing that we think of, um, uh, the best image of that thing that comes to mind. So it's, once again, we are taking a shortcut. We are solving a shortcut based on the thing that represents that idea. Okay, so the other type of heuristic is what is known as an availability heuristic. Okay, so it says you make a judgment about something based on how available examples are in your mind. So this heuristic has a lot to do with our memory of specific instances and what you've been exposed to. So what is happening here is the media is a great example of availability heuristics. What is the thing that comes to your mind first? What pops up in your brain first? What is most readily available? So you have examples like in this little picture, 12 die in a plane crash, and we're just like, oh my gosh, like, we should never, we shouldn't fly a plane. It's just too dangerous. And so things that are really unlikely are often shown in media, um, and so that's a thing that comes to our mind about the situation we're going into. But in all honesty, it is the drive from your house to the airport is more dangerous than actually getting on a plane. Um, and so, but the problem is our availability heuristic doesn't pull up all the car crashes that we've heard about or seen. It pulls up the plane crashes that we have heard about. And so that has become something that is, signified with danger or whatever, even though it is much more safe than driving an actual car. So you got to be careful with representative and availability. Um, you know, Try not to get too wrapped up in the difference between the two. You're gonna be able to work yourself around in circles, um, and be like, well, this example here or this example there. Just remember, the AP exam isn't going to be actively trying to trip you up. Okay, just know representative. Hey, this is the best example that is in my head, and availability it's the first thing that pops into my head. So I want to look at some things that get in the way of us solving problems. So we're going to talk about a few hurdles, a few things that get in the way of us solving problems. So the first of this is known as the confirmation bias. It says we look for evidence to confirm our beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them. Okay? See this all the time. You're going to be seeing this now with the coronavirus running rampant in the world. People who will look for um, look for evidence that confirms what they believe and ignore evidence that contradicts it. So you'll find people that will look to certain news stations because that follows their idea of what's going on, and then they'll ignore evidence or things that go against it. When you have arguments with people, we will ignore evidence from their side and only really pursue and talk about evidence from ours. Human beings can be very, you know, linear in their thinking. And so confirmation bias is a hurdle to us actually solving a problem. Because if you are confronted with something and you feel like you know how to solve it, and you go into this like, all right, well, let's tackle this, and you're only going with what you know, your research or your bias or whatever, you'll often have difficulty hearing someone else say, oh, well, this is a better way, or this is another way of doing things, and we'll just kind of ignore all of that and just go back to our own beliefs. So mental set happens when we have had success in situations that are similar, and so we use that prior success in order to solve the problem. So you have a math problem in front of you, and you have solved that math problem by using you use your equation x. Okay. And so what ends up happening is this new problem, you use this equation in order to solve because it used to solve it before. And what often happens is that that was not the way to solve it. You needed to use, whatever y in order to solve the correct, to find the answer. But because we have not used y before, because we have found um, positive and solved problems before with x, we'll often use x instead. And so this can get in the way of us solving problems because we kind of keep going back to what works before. Approaching people and having conversations, let's do that. Solving video game problems like how to beat a boss or how to do this. We often go back to what has worked before in order to solve the problem instead of finding new ways to solve the issue. Okay, so take a second and see if you can solve this. You are to connect all 9 of these dots with no more than 4 straight connecting lines, that is drawn without lifting the pencil from the paper. So basically, you've got to connect all of these dots, all 9 of these dots, but you cannot pick up your pen and draw new lines. You can't do that. Okay, that's you can't do that. Okay, you've got to do it in one continuous go. Okay, so good luck. See if you can solve that. It'll work. You can pause the video and it'll apply to the next slide. All right, so let's start by solving this problem. So if you haven't done it, I'll show you. If you have done it, here we go. All right, good job. Okay, so this is one of the ways to solve this problem, and excuse the fact that I am not drawing perfectly straight lines. You can imagine that this can be done by drawing straight lines. Okay, so what did I do here? I went outside the square. What oftentimes people will do is they will try to solve this problem by staying within the lines, when in fact the only way to solve them is by going outside of the lines in order to touch all of them. And this is what we look at for self-imposed limitations. We are constantly creating limitations for ourselves when we try to solve problems. I am not smart enough. I am not good looking enough. I am not this or I am not that when a problem arises. when in fact, none of those limitations are really there. And so people say this about themselves, and then they are not able to do well, and they end up failing. And this is just this is simply a self-imposed limitation. And once again, it is another hurdle that stops us from solving problems. Okay. So next we have what is known as functional fixedness. So as it says, it's the inability to see a new use for an object. Basically, you are at home, you have to nail in a picture frame, but you don't have a hammer. But what you do have is you do have like a piece of like a block of wood, or you have a screwdriver, and you can use the block of the wood or the screwdriver in order to knock in that nail into the wall. But people will often not see this and not see that, oh, a screwdriver, its only purpose is to screw things in. Oh, a block of wood, it has no purpose. So the functional fixedness is not being able to see a new item, not being able to see that a certain item can have a not a normal purpose, and solve your problem using this thing. So you're on the bus and you are trying to take a little nap while you're on the bus. And you're like, oh, I don't have like a pillow or a blanket. Well, you don't have an actual pillow or a blanket, but you do have a backpack, you do have a jacket, and you could use those for a pillow and or a blanket. That would be an example of functional fixedness, not being able to see the new use for that object. Okay, lastly, we have framing. We talked about framing when we were looking at um, uh, reconstructive memory. Basically, this is um, a the way in which a problem is presented to us. Um, so if you are to, the way that you give a person the problem or ask them how to solve it will influence the way that they are able to succeed or not succeed. You talking to your little brother or sister, you're like, oh, well, you can't jump this high, I bet you. And, sometimes that might influence them to be like, oh, you're right, I'm just not, um, uh, I'm just, not good enough to do it. Or maybe you have a question that's like this. You should not drink um, alcohol more than 2 times per day. Or you should not drink alcohol more than 730 drinks a year. The way those two things read is very, very different. The way those two things are framed are very, very different. And you can see, like, oh, 2 drinks a day, that's not a big deal. Versus, wow, 730 drinks, that's a lot. Like, whoa, man, what is wrong with this person? It's the same thing, but the way that the thing is framed influences how a person understands it and how a person responds to it. Okay, so that is cognition. That is the way that we solve problems and some issues with solving problems. Good work today, and see you later.